So the culture is beginning to recognize that pornography is creating a public health crisis. But still, some people want to say that pornography is not a problem.
So what gives, huh?
Let's shed some light on that. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the official Plugged In Vodcast. I'm Jake, and I'm sitting here alongside
Adam Holtz.
And today, although we love to have fun on this podcast,
we do like to have fun, it's true.
We're talking about a serious subject.
Yeah.
One that's being talked about a lot in the culture right now, all over the place, like not just in Christian circles, but in secular circles, in progressive circles, and conservative circles, regressive circles.
No.
All the circles are talking about pornography. And I mean, it's been on Time magazine just in the last couple of weeks.
Yep. April 11th this year.
And everybody's writing about this on multiple different angles. We've talked about Bree Olson's interview in our blog. And so we want to talk about the fact that it seems like the culture is starting, some parts of the culture are starting to wake up to the fact that pornography is causing problems.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yep.
But still, there's this thread that runs through a lot of these comments and a lot of this discourse that says, although it's causing a public health crisis, porn's not actually a problem.
Right.
And we disagree with that.
We do disagree with that. The most interesting place that we've seen that really in play recently is with Bree Olson. Now, she's probably best known publicly in some ways as one of Charlie Sheen's former goddesses. If you remember back in like 2011.
Very vaguely.
You know, Charlie paraded around with these women on his arm and called them his goddesses, and she was one of them. And she was also a porn star for a number of years, and she recently got out. Actually, I think she got out a number of years ago, but recently she's been talking about what she thinks about pornography now, and it's a little bit of a jumbled perspective. She has found that her career in pornography means that she can't go anywhere without being recognized, and that there's this huge sort of cultural stigma attached to being a former porn star.
Yeah.
And because of that, she's saying things like this: I send a very strong message to young girls. Don't do porn. I understand it. You want to embrace your sexuality. I can do whatever I want with my body, but you're just going to have a life of crap in front of you. You can never work with children after you do porn. You can never work in the medical field after you do porn. And these are things that teenage girls don't think about. And she was 19 when she started, and so she wasn't thinking about it. Right. She was just making a lot of money and kind of enjoying that. But since then, she's gotten out and realized, man, I'm not sure what kind of a life I'm going to have. But then the interesting thing is she comes back and says, the problem isn't porn. The problem is people's attitudes towards porn, which sort of feels like maybe splitting a very fine hair, that she's on the receiving end of all of this prejudice, basically. Right. And yet she's not really willing to entertain the idea that maybe pornography itself is something that causes damage that as a society we really need to grapple with.
Right. That although people's reactions to her aren't, good and aren't right, that they're stemming from pain, they're stemming from a reality where the things she was involved with did and does cause harm.
Yeah. And, I think on a theological level, way back in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve fell. And what's the first thing they do? They cover themselves up. And before the fall, it said they were naked and they had no shame. Right. And as soon as sin came in, there was shame with regard to their bodies. And I think what the culture is trying to get to is this idea that there shouldn't be any shame. Like in a weird way, they're wanting to go back to the garden.
Right.
But there's some things that are really sideways there with our culture's understanding of the purpose of sexuality and how it should be used.
Right. And I think that's where we see this big divide.
Yes.
That culture and pornography and sexuality are really intertwined.
That's right.
At deep levels, and that's deep within our souls and our psyches and our desires. Like, these are natural desires that have shame in them because of the fall, because of our human nature.
Yeah.
And I think part of I mean, a huge part of sin, I mean, sin is what separates us from God.
Yes.
And it's our pursuit of our own desires in our own ways.
Yeah.
And so we take these things that are God-given, like our sexuality.
Right.
But we're always trying to get back to the perfection, but we're trying to do it our own way.
Yeah, we want to do it on our own terms. And, two questions that I think are pretty important with regard to talking about sex in general, which, frankly, we don't do a whole lot of because it's kind of uncomfortable. It's even with all of the sex in our culture, I think among Christians, it can still sort of be a taboo topic.
Right.
But I think these are important questions. What is the purpose of our sexuality and who gets to decide? And our culture is saying the purpose of our sexuality is our own enjoyment and fun and self-actualization, and I get to decide.
Right.
I am the total authority on my body and what I do with it. And really, the cultural ethic of sexuality stops at consent. If two adults are consenting, nobody's being exploited or pressured, that's the end of the conversation. Well, Scripture says that there is a very important purpose to our sexuality, and that is to unite a man and a woman in marriage. And so it brings them together, it creates unity, and then that creates children. I mean, that's the other obvious thing in play here. And so a biblical understanding of the purpose of sexuality is radically different from where our culture is at. And our culture is, I think, starting to kind of scratch its head a little bit as people realize, wow, maybe some of this completely boundary-free, shame-free sexuality isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Right. And the positive thing in all of this is that although there are still some that want to hold on to the freedom of our self-gratification in this regard, there are those that are speaking out, and are standing up and saying, no, not only is this a public health crisis in general because of the effects, but let's actually recognize the cause of these effects. Let's go to at least closer to that root. So, I mean, you've got people like the actor Terry Crews, who you probably know from Old Spice commercials. He's been very public in the last couple of months about his struggle with pornography, his addiction to pornography. And he's been bold enough to say, like, pornography is addictive. It does cause problems, and those problems it causes are physical, mental, emotional, relational. That they caused rifts in his family and his marriage. That really get at the heart of what our what we would say as Christians our sexuality is meant for. It tries to cut that out. And even the governor of Utah has just made a declaration that pornography is a public health crisis.
And this issue of Time that focuses on pornography, their focus is on a growing group of mostly young men who are saying that pornography has so warped their understanding of sexuality that they struggle to be in a sexual relationship with an actual woman because of what porn has done to how they see the world and how they experience it and how they view women. And so it's critical too from another perspective.
And so as we look at where we diverge from a large section of the culture in terms of we do see pornography as a problem and we see how pervasive it is in our culture, how does that tie into our discernment as believers in how we interact with culture? Both as consumers of culture, because it's so pervasive. We are all consumers, no matter where we're at. And then as people that want to redeem the culture, like how do we walk that line, and what does this pervasiveness, kind of lead us to a point of decision? Like, what do we have to do about this?
Wow, those are a couple really big questions. So interrupt me if I talk too long in responding to them. I think with regard to the discernment question, I think that we have to take seriously the reality that pornographic images influence us. They go in, they shape our expectations, they shape what we value, what we think is important. And even if we think that that's not true, they may be influencing us in ways that we don't completely understand. So I think on the first level, there's just an awareness. And I think the next step probably is taking steps to protect ourselves from exposure to and the influence of pornography. If it's not an issue, just being aware that you can accidentally stumble on something so easily on the internet. One keystroke off and something that you weren't expecting can pop up. And if it is something that you've wrestled with, or you're a parent and you have children, then I think there needs to be a real active stance in terms of protecting yourself through filtering software, and just being really realistic and not being naive. Oh, well, we'll never look at that, or my kids will never look at it.
Right.
Probably there's going to be exposure. And I think because of that, as a parent, you also have to, I think, be more engaged than maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, where pornography was out there, but you really had to kind of go out of your way to find it.
Right.
Now, in some ways, you have to work to avoid it. It will find you.
Yeah, it's going to find you.
And it's going to find your kids, even if you're not that, directly influenced.
And more subtly, and we've talked about this in a previous vodcast. We'll link to it below. But in the media we watch, it's not always just the images we see.
Right.
It's the attitudes towards sexuality that can also be really problematic, and that we need to be proactive in not only our own minds, but in our kids' minds, and talking about, even in a show where there's no pornographic images, there's often attitudes of this casual, permissive, self-gratifying approach to sexuality. That really does seep in.
It does seep in.
Because we are naturally selfish creatures. And so it's easy for us to go down that road of it's about me and it's about what I want. Yeah,
exactly. So there you go, Jake.
There we go. So it's a really big topic, and we can't cover all of it. I mean, we'd need this is a human history problem, going all the way back to the Old Testament, to the fall of mankind.
Garden of Eden. Yeah.
But it's one we need to talk about. We can't be quiet about it. We can't ignore it for the sake of ourselves, for the sake of our children, and for the life of the world. We're called to engage the world with love, and part of that is recognizing when things are harmful. Sin is harmful to the world. Right. And these are great opportunities to talk to the world about why it's harmful. Because they're already giving you that first step.
Yeah, and I think that when we as Christians get our house in order, I think that we have something really powerful to offer.
Yeah.
But, when there's stumbling, when we're dabbling in it, when there is real hypocrisy that we haven't dealt with, I think it undermines our ability to speak significantly and powerfully into the culture.
Right. So start talking about it in your own circles. Get it out there. Share this to start the conversations, and to get people talking about it, and to get this stuff out in the open. That's another thing that both the Bible says is valuable. And Terry Crews, the actor, was like, talk about it, get it out there, stop hiding it. So talk to us here on YouTube, on our blog, Facebook, Twitter. Share this, because this is a conversation that needs to be had for ourselves. Again, for ourselves, for our children, for the life of the world.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us here on the official Plugged In Vodcast. Be sure to also subscribe to us so we can keep bringing you these conversations.
What do you say?
And we will catch you guys on the flip side.
All right.
Are you going to say goodbye?
Why?
He's like, I'll be back. Whatever.
Yeah, I'll be back.
See you guys.
I was looking at the camera, so I totally missed your nonverbal.